It will come up probably now on your screen. If you want, please introduce yourself in the chat so we all know who's here. That's always nice. If you have any questions during our discussion, put them in the chat and we'll get to them either fairly right away if it fits into the conversation, or get to them towards the end. We'll try to end promptly at 8:30 and then have the opportunity to hang out a little bit without the recording. That's kind of the benefit. If you're here live, get a little bit of extra compared to those who are only listening later on. If you have any feedback, any questions that you want to share, you can reach me at legislation@oregonpta.org. And with that, I'll stop sharing my screen. And it is my great pleasure to have with us tonight John Rexford, Chair of the Oregon Quality Education Commission. To introduce John a little bit to all of you, John grew up with both his parents working as educators. So obviously as a young man, he tried to rebel and definitely not step into their footsteps and not work in education. You can see how that turned out. John instead looked for a career in business, earned a Bachelor of Science in Business from Oregon State University, and then on to receive an MBA from Portland State University. But in 1985, he made a decision that would have a long-lasting impact. He took an accounting job in a rural school district. And ever since, he has worked for better schools and serving our students. He has worked with the Wendler Pine schools for 23 years, most recently as deputy superintendent, and served as superintendent for the High Desert Education Service District from 2012 to 2017. In between, he earned his educational administration credentials at the University of Oregon, and now in his semi-retirement, teaches school finance for Lewis and Clark, as well as serving on a number of nonprofit boards. And the reason he's here is obviously the Quality Education Commission. John, please tell us about the commission, what it is, and more specifically about the quality education model that you all work on. And thank you so much for being here, and welcome.
Great, thanks, Robin. I appreciate those kind words, and that is a true statement. I tried as hard as I could to stay out of education, and I failed at that about as well as I'm failing at retirement. So most of my career in that path that I took was in the world of school business. I only went back in my late 40s to get my education credential and started to have an S in the title that I was carrying at the various organizations. But why I'm hanging out here is that I've been on the Quality Education Commission since about 2017. I've been the chair of the commission since 2020. Robin asked me to share a little bit about what the model is, the mysterious black box that produces numbers of great conversation and great interest. I'm going to share a screen momentarily. I do want to clarify. So I will often use I believe, I think. That'll be my personal opinion. When I'm speaking for the commission, I'll try to use we or the commission. So this is one of those, because I know some of the questions that Robin's going to ask me, he's going to ask me as a veteran school leader. Some of those will be my personal opinion, and I just want to make sure that I'm clear when I'm speaking for the commission versus myself. So with that kind of big caveat, let me jump into it. And I'll share my screen.
Take it away. Yep, that works.
Cool. So, well, we just did this part. I always like to start with students. And so the department gave me this great slide that I can use. And the numbers are starting, they're about a year old, but we serve 550,000 K-12 students. More than 300 languages are spoken. Last fall, there was about 40,000 kindergartners that entered the system. We drew this through 197 school districts. 19 ESDs, a whole host of charter schools, and 1,270 school buildings. And I just always note our early learning partners, because they really are laying the groundwork for our success in the K-12 system. I'm going to talk mostly about the model now. This will be a little bit of drinking from a fire hose. We will have the PowerPoint available for you in PDF format. And in fact, Robin, I don't care if you drop it in the chat whenever you want. I know some people like to be overachievers and get ahead of the teacher, and that's just fine with me. So let's look at a few things about the QEC, the Quality Education Commission. So the model itself was a brainchild of late Speaker of the House, Lynn Lundquist. He was actually from Powell Butte, Oregon. I knew Lynn when he was serving. And he really wanted to answer a basic question: how much money is enough? He was dealing with a lot of constituents and stakeholders who always wanted more funding, was actually the right answer, but he wanted to know how could we determine what was the right amount. And that was the birth of what became the Quality Education Commission in statute. That statute that the legislature created was in response to a constitutional amendment, Article 8, Section 8, that requires that the legislature appropriate money sufficient to ensure the state system meets the quality goals established by law. Fair enough. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. And it requires the legislature to publish a report that either demonstrates that they appropriated that money or identified why they didn't meet that goal. That's the short version of that. So 11-member commission was created by, this would be Kitzhaber 1.0 back in 2000. And there have been, I think, 11 or 12 reports delivered every other year since then. This is a professional judgment model. It's based on prototype elementaries. We'll expand on that. But it is defined in statute that those best practices are based on research, data, the professional judgment of the commission, and public values. It incorporates a lot of actual costs from prior years, and we combine those through some regression models to try to really link up what we're doing in the model itself. The commission, in its current form, made up of 9 people right now. You'll see a wide variety of folks are represented in this commission. We actually have 2 open seats. This is where I do my pitch that you can contact the governor's office at any time and made application to become a commissioner. So we've got 2 open seats. Those are not designated. They were previously held by, one was a K-12 school administrator, one was a retired university professor, but they don't have those labels on those seats. So if you're interested and want to become active in this work, I encourage you to contact the governor's office through their executive appointments process. So I mentioned that the requirement of the Constitution is to appropriate money sufficient to meet quality education goals. And they're defined in statute. And as anybody who knows me will say, man, that's a lot of words. The commission has parsed that out working with staff, and we found 19 different elements that we think exist when you parse that long paragraph out. What this commission and prior commissions have done is used a 90% 4-year graduation rate as the proxy for these goals. One of the things that I'll mention is that this commission is interested in expanding that so that it's not just a single data point from which we measure success of our system. We did, in parsing that out, believe that 18 of those 19 are reflected in the makeup of the quality education model in and of itself. So we feel pretty comfortable that the model, while we're using 90% four-year graduation rate as a proxy for these glittering generalities, we think that that its work or its mechanisms account for this set of educational goals. Reports are due in the even number years, no later than August 1st. And if you count on your fingers how many months that is, that's less than one hand's worth of fingers. We are working very, very hard on drafting the 2024 report right now. The model is being updated, and we're proceeding with having that ready to go for the legislature by the end of July. So the model itself estimates the statewide cost of delivering K-12 education for two things. One, the current service level, the CSL, which was really a baseline case, and we estimate what it will take to deliver the same set of services and supports for students that we have in the current biennium, and estimate what that will cost in the next biennium. And then we also use this to develop our estimate of the full amount of resources needed to be sufficient to meet those educational goals. I will tell you the model itself is simple to describe and complex to implement. So I'm going to talk shortly about the prototypical schools upon which it's built, but I will tell you that there are, I believe the number is 461 individual data points and inputs that are included in the model itself, in the algorithm that develops the number that we'll talk about at the very end of this presentation. As I mentioned before, it's a professional judgment model enhanced by statistical analyses. This means something if you're an economist. But all I will say is that while no model is accurate to the point that we can argue just dollars and cents, but any model will improve, any sound model will improve decision making upon which is made based on that information. One of the things we'll talk about again down the road is we think the model can be improved of, and I want to be really careful in helping you understand that we don't think it's broken. We just think there's an incredible opportunity to improve it. As I mentioned before, 3 prototype schools. We basically have an elementary, a middle, and a high school. We basically estimate the number of prototype schools that we need to serve that 550,000 students, and we scale it up. So I said it's easy to explain, but it's got a lot of moving parts. Here's what this looks like. So a prototype elementary school, 340 students, includes all-day K. That wasn't the case just a few years ago. Class size averages of 20 K through 5, specialists in art, music, PE, reading, math, gifted and talented, library, and ESL, and a counselor for every 250 students. There are a whole host of things. There's a principal, there's clerical support, there's janitors. All those are included in the costing. We really take a stack of goods and services and go, what do we need to run an elementary school? What do we need to run a middle school? What do we need to run a high school? One of the elements that we're looking at for the high school is that there aren't a lot of high schools of 1,000 students in the state. We tend to have a cluster of high schools around 400 or 500 students, and a cluster of high schools that are around 1,500 students. And so one of the improvements that we might make in an incremental manner would be to model both sizes so that it's a little more applicable to the actual ground truthing on across the state. the QEM, the quality education model, has been updated over and over again. These are the major updates. These were included just for illustrative purposes. And I would say that the most important work for us in the 2022 report was that we really dug deep into the inputs and updated to reflect current and best practices. And I'll give you my very best example, and that was that the model assumed one computing device for every 6 students, which is what the world looked like 15 or 20 years ago. But right now we know that 1-to-1 is essentially the model that we implement. So we updated those numbers. And okay, I'm gonna slide back and I'm gonna stop my share. I said I gave you a little fire hose overview. Feel free to take a look at the slides. I'm gonna stop my share for a minute and let Robin take the floor back.
Yeah, take some follow-up question. Thank you for that fire hose, and I did drop the presentation in the chat, so people were able to read along and read ahead, if that's your thing. A couple of questions for the QEM and kind of what goes into it. Is the model able to deal with different student population? Obviously, students that come to school that have food insecurity, housing insecurity, maybe need glasses and come to school without glasses, have medical needs. And it's more difficult, obviously, to educate that student population than the student population from a more socioeconomic, from a different social economic background. Is the model how's the model addressing that? Is that possible?
I mean, and this is an I statement. I think the model captures a lot of those, but I think particularly when you get into some of the basic, I'm going to call them social needs or fundamental needs, food insecurity, that sort of thing, we're probably not touching on that. To the extent that many meal services are available now through the National School Lunch or School Meals Program. Those data are included in the model. I was really hoping that in updating the model, we'd have a really robust stakeholder input process that would help us identify and reveal some of those gaps so that we could incorporate those into future models. I can't remember, I speak to it in one of these slides, but the update that it looks like got funded out of Senate Bill 1552 is going to be pretty narrow and really run by staff at LPRO, Legislative Policy and Research Office. And so they don't appear to be envisioning any kind of stakeholder input. So I'm thinking the commission will continue to try to work to understand those potential gaps in our calculations.
And in the chat, there just was the suggestion to have high school populations of 2,000 students and more.
Yeah.
For example. And also for the number that you come up with for the QEM, my understanding is that's only operational. So all capital costs, if the school has a functioning gym or not.
Yeah, I actually think, and I just to directly answer your question, most capital construction costs, school construction costs, are not included in the model. And it really reflects that Oregon has a bifurcated or split funding system that has the cost of operations set as a state obligation, right? But the cost of school construction and updating and renovating, all that sort of major lift is at a local level. I believe this creates a significant inequity in Oregon school funding. And this is across the state. And whether we're talking about rural poor districts or even large urban districts that lack the funding to update their facilities, we need to have safe and conducive learning environments for students. And if I sound like I'm on a little bit of a soapbox here, I am, because this is something that I've personally advocated for over most of my whole career. When I was at Ben Lapine, we had the support of a community and the means, and we built 13 schools. And since then, Ben Lapine's built 4 or 5 more because they've had continuous support from their community. Many school districts serving many students don't have that ability or willingness to support their students. So I probably over answered that. I got on my soapbox, but
No,
it's not much for me, Robin. Thanks.
that is important. And I don't, yeah, it's when we talk about the QEM number and how that is not met, it doesn't even include a lot of other things. I think that's really important to keep in mind. Talking about a little bit, we just heard how the QEM is right now. Let's talk a little bit about what of that is working and what of that is not. You got a little bit into it, but if you could, like, give us a little bit more details, for example, in terms of like the process, the commission, the chair. There was a question about like, what's your budget to come up with these really complex and important numbers?
We have one staff member assigned to us, an economist. He works at ODE, but he has other duties also. Other staff are just loaned to us by the department. So one of the things that we've been working on through both the long session and the short session, we're trying to get the commission staffed by a couple of folks that could spend some dedicated time to our work. The ironic thing is we're crowdsourcing our writing for the report. That report that I was due in about 4 months, different sections are assigned to different commissioners. We've also got great support from our two, one is Evan Fuller, our economist, and Dan Farley, who is our kind of loaned executive. They're helping us write, but I'm hoping that in the long run, and you know, my term expires in 2025. I'm hoping that in the long session of 2025, we can get the commission, future commission staffed appropriately.
And the commissioners themselves, you are all volunteers.
That'd be correct.
So
Yeah.
it's basically a couple of part-timers and a soccer team of volunteers.
Yeah, you got it.
That's where we give you the question of, is it $15 billion? Is it 17? What else? What do you like about the process? And what else about the process itself? How you're getting to the numbers do you think is working or not?
Yeah, I think as I said, I don't think it's broken. I think this is something we can improve, and having regular staff would give us the opportunity to incrementally improve it every 2 years. Obviously, I mentioned the Senate Bill 1552 study that we hope informs it. I'm going to share again a slide.
There it is.
And so the commission itself has some real high-level priorities. As I mentioned before, we'd like to include some more indicators other than just that 90% graduation rate, 4-year graduation rate. So Student Success Act indicators, 3rd grade reading, 9th grade on track, a variety of those kinds of things that we know make a difference in having students have success in our system. Making sure that we're investing to have culturally responsive curriculum, including regional cost variations as weights. And we were looking at some, it turns out that providing school in very rural settings is expensive, because we may think that you're going to have 20 kids in a classroom, an elementary classroom, but if you only have 6, you still need to have a teacher. So we're exploring that. It's not far enough that we're going to include it in this report. I mentioned my pet issue, and that's addressing capital construction. And then we're excited to incorporate any relevant recommendations from the LPRO study that's coming from Senate Bill 1552.
I've heard discussions about doing a more thorough update of the QEM for a few years now, I feel like. And I know there were some bills to that regard. Why hasn't it, what do you think is keeping the legislator from giving you the funding that you need?
Well, I'll just admit, there's a lot of stuff going on, right? Senate Bill 251, which was our bill from 2023, that included some staff, included an update of the commission, kind of got lost in the walkout kerfuffle. And even though the Senate got back in session and just took on a huge amount of legislative workload right at the end, we got lost in the shuffle. We'd had earlier efforts, but we really thought 251 was going to be our ticket. We are appreciative of Senator Dembro in including at least something in Senate Bill 1552. I was trying to get some staff in that, but they're not big on adding staff in the short session. But you know, I think we've got an opportunity with this update from the LPRO study, and if we're successful in the 2025 legislature and getting some staff for the commission, I think whether or not the LPRO study does it, we can include stakeholder feedback in our study. We're putting our toes in the water in that, and Robin is going to share with you all a link to a survey that we have out on practices, best practices, that we'd love you to wade into as citizens or whatever role you have in your various organizations.
I'll drop that in the chat in the end, so nobody gets distracted by filling out a survey. Let's talk about the funding gap, because you're coming up with a number that we need, and then the legislature gives schools less money. Let's talk about that.
Let's talk about the numbers. Okay, so what is the bottom line? Well, I got a slide for that. Turns out.
I saw the slides before, so I know you.
So this really gives you a snapshot over the last, what is this, about
15?
7, 8 biennia, so 15 years or so. You'll see that the gap was huge. And I remember at some point with Senator Devlin talking about this number being pie in the sky. We're getting noise from somewhere.
So,
probably Senator Devlin. About being pie in the sky, but well, we really have made some serious progress. And you notice that in the 21-23 biennia, we were actually pretty dang close, within 5%. But you recall there was this little thing called a pandemic going on that was affected all that. So some of that was based on some enrollment quirks. And so the deficits bumped back up to around 12% in the current biennium. I still think we've made a ton of progress. So you know, one of the things you ask, how big is it? Well, that's about how big. And here's another way to look at it. If you're a line graph person, that light blue is the commission's recommendation over time. That gray line that you see, let's see, I don't know, can you all see my cursor? That gray line is the addition of the School Success Act, the corporate activity tax, and you'll see that it helped us move up and get closer. But we still got that measurable deficit in the current year. It's around 12%. That's about 1.5 billion. Robin, I think you asked me whose fault that was.
Yes, that
would really not my call. There are lots of needs and priorities in state budgets over the years. As I mentioned, the gap's been shrinking. But I do want to put an important note on that. When we reach full funding, we're going to celebrate that for one biennium. But it turns out that kids go to school for 13 years in our system. And to really meet those goals, it's not meeting that goal for any one biennium. It's meeting that again and again and again and again. I really appreciate that the governor has identified education as one of her top 3 priorities. And I believe we're making progress because of that. There's some fine detail related to calculation of the current service level, that sort of thing that we don't need to dive in tonight. But I'm really excited with the governor's proactive approach to trying to bring stakeholders together for some of the work in putting together the proposed budget for the next biennium.
I'm going to grab some questions from the chat. And people, if you put the question in the chat, feel free to just share them with everyone instead of just me. So people can see them. That's helpful. One question was, well, if we're not funding it fully, what's the point in even updating it? Kind of. And if we know we need to update it, isn't the need much larger, especially with the capital costs?
Oh, I suspect it is. You know, we've gotten some pushback on the number because we updated our input in that 2022 report, and we've received some pushback. And I think we've defended it appropriately. I would just say, what's the acid test, right? We're supposedly within 12% or so of that number, the goal. And I'm seeing headlines almost every day that hundreds of staff are being laid off, that large districts are having tens of millions of dollars of deficits. To me, that's the ultimate acid test. We're not funding schools appropriately yet. We're getting closer, but we're not there yet. And I would just say the ground truthing shows it. And then when we throw in the capital construction costs, I don't even have a clue on the order of magnitude there. So this is an I statement. I believe that if you don't like the number now, you're really not going to like it after we update the model.
And we still need it.
Absolutely.
Do you think should we advocate for a specific number, or how do we, in terms of messaging, kind of how should we phrase it? Is this, we need X amount? And
I would suggest, and this is another I statement, I would suggest asking for the Quality Education Commission recommended number. We're still not there yet, so it's a bit aspirational. Or having the legislature, sorry, got my words mixed up. At least define a path. So if they can't do it in this biennium, make a commitment that you're going to cover 50% of the gap in one and cover the rest of the gap in the next one.
Yeah.
You know, some sort of short path, not, yeah, we'll do it in the future.
Trajectory. Another thing, and we had talked about this offline, there is sometimes this thinking that the QM, you brought it up, is somewhat aspirational, and how if we would fully fund the QEM, we would have like private school, Oxford level, fancy schools. Can you speak to that?
No, yeah. No, we're not going to have fancy. We're not, and I always hate to go back to the auto industry, but you know, I think we're building a good Chevy here. We're not building Cadillacs. I was trying to put that in a modern world. I tried to use a Tesla the other day, but that irritated everybody. So that we really are, I think, trying to build a meat and potato system. But we've got a real big upside. We know that quality career technical education opportunities, CTE, can lead to some amazing success with students. It's great for keeping kids in school. And it sets them up for success and perhaps working with their hands after high school. And those programs are very, very expensive to run. And I'm not sure the model captures all of those to the extent it could. So no, we're not talking about building Oxford here. We're probably trying to talk about building Oregon State University. Go Beavs.
still staying with the funding gap, but jumping a little bit around in the questions. If we were to snap our fingers and suddenly all schools were funded at the QEM level, what is the biggest difference do you think people would see?
More people. We're a people business. More adults in the classroom with students. And some of them would have the traditional label of teacher. Although I don't think it's terribly traditional anymore. But all kinds of supports, right? So we talked about those potentially unfunded needs, social emotional supports, mental and behavioral health supports. We are a people business. And I think the more time we can have more adults in touch and supporting our students, the better. And my colleagues will kill me, but we don't need more administrators. We need more people in the classroom and in the schools, right? So, yeah, I know. I just lost the popularity contest, but most of them would agree. I kid a little bit.
And there's obviously, there would be a cost to fully funding the QEM, but there's also a cost, that's from the chat, about not funding the QEM. Has the commission ever looked or tried to look at that?
I haven't been part of that. I don't think in my 7 years on the commission, that's a particular angle that we look at. I'm kind of aware of it just because I hung out with educators for 30 some years, but that's a really interesting perspective. I kind of like that. At what cost are we not funding the QEM?
Yeah. High school dropouts. I just saw statistics in terms of like healthcare costs later on, crime rates, so forth and so
Yeah,
on.
oh, absolutely. I know yeah. I just couldn't rattle them off the top of my head, but
since we're not funding the QEM, and it's worth repeating that as often as necessary, do you the students that are underfunded today are gonna have gaps next year? Does the model ever account for that? That we're like,
well,
digging
the
out of
model
a big
has
hole.
pretty rich extended learning time in the model itself. And I use extended learning for both extended school day, extended school year, and summer learning. There's some pretty robust components in the model itself right now, accounting for those opportunities to provide extended learning. At the same time, I really like the notion. There's another I statement. I really like the notion of getting those kids, getting them the supports they need in the schools when they're there, so that if you're running a little behind, you need a little extra support. Summer school doesn't become a punishment, get perceived as a punishment. So it's a personal bias. I, I I want school to be fun. I mean, school should be fun, right? Learning is fun.
Yes.
So one of the things I always talked about, and I was probably atypical business official. I try not to beat all the fun out of school. So I'm a big supporter of extracurricular and co-curricular activities, big supporter of field trips, a big supporter of field days and getting out of the classroom.
Do you happen to know if that is including the QEM and to which regard?
An awful lot of it is.
Okay.
So I feel pretty good about those particular areas.
Let's move into a little bit of a lightning round. So looking for short, quick answers here. Name a strength and or a weakness of schools in Oregon.
Oh, well, that's a great question. One strength that I think, and I guess it probably comes from some of my business work, my MBA. I got my MBA during the total quality management period when that was the thing to do. But one of the things I read a lot of Jim Collins and Good to Great and Built to Last and some of those books that he wrote about great organizations. And one thing that we do is counterintuitive. but we serve every child who shows up at the door. Every child that shows up at the schoolhouse door, we serve. Now, we can go a long ways to serving them better, but we don't turn anybody away. Everybody has a right to a free and appropriate public education. We don't get excluded by tuition. We serve everybody. And I think we do that really, really well. I think almost anybody who shows up at schoolhouse door is going to be welcomed. And I think that's a real strength of our system.
I love that. Name one thing that all schools should do, but very few do.
Oh, you know, I think we need to get out and beat the brush to find these missing kids. So I think most people know, but if you don't, we lost about 30,000 students during the pandemic, right? So we know that some of them went to registered homeschool. Some of them went to private school, but not as many as you would think. And there's about 20,000 kids that just disappeared, and you can't explain them away by outmigration. They just have disappeared. And I think we need to be proactive and going up, finding those kids. And I don't know if that's assigning, kind of social work type employees to go out and beat the brush. But we need to find those kids and get them back in the system. Because the longer they're out of the system, the further they're behind they're going to be. And those deficits, we'd be hard pressed to make them all up, but we aren't going to make them up at all if we don't get those kids in the door. We do know that demographically, birth rates seem to be declining. So we would expect that our kindergarten numbers are going to be a little lower, and obviously that trough will pass through our system. But we need to go get those kids back. I think that's where we're missing the boat.
I will now go to more chat questions, and that's kind of a little bit random here. I'll work my way back and start with, is Bruce Baker from Rutgers being asked to assist with the QEM review? Do you know? What do you think of his work if you...
Oh, I've read some of his articles, and some of his work is very well respected. I want to see his take on the Oregon system. I don't necessarily agree with all of his thinking, but he is regarded as one of the top experts in what funding, what resource level you're at versus the outcomes that you're getting from your systems. So I'm kind of intrigued on taking a look. I'm game for anything.
Okay. Do you think legislators understand the impact CTE has on students in Oregon?
I think they're getting there. And all I would say is that I had a meeting with a couple folks. Actually, there'd be a couple commissioners and I met with Representative Neeren, Senator Dembro, Senator Frederick, and Representative McLean, and we were kind of roundtabling what they would be looking for in our 2024 report. And I know at least two of them raised questions around CTE, understanding that it has some pretty powerful effect on graduation rates. And so I think that awareness is coming up. I wouldn't be shy about sharing that with your local legislators.
Thank you. And I'm jumping a lot here. There was a question about how special education costs are included in the QEM.
They are accounted for in both staffing and some of the extra costs. Our model does not restrict. Most of you know the school funding formula caps special ed funding for students on IEPs, individual education plans, caps that at 11% of the student population. We know that statewide that actually runs about 14%. And so our model does not contain caps. So it does account for a lot of that. I will say those needs are escalating, and some of our students need lots and lots of supports that are probably not completely funded yet, but I think we're making progress, and it's certainly addressed in the most basic components of the model.
One more very specific question. What do you think statewide salary schedules, would that help? Do you have an opinion on that?
Oh, I have an opinion on that. No, I'm intrigued by that, and I understand the some of the forces and the interests that are pushing us towards that. I think the practical effect would be that it would raise the cost of delivering education. And that's not a bad thing. It's just a practical effect, because in my experience, when you're standardizing a compensation schedule, you tend to bring everybody up to the level of the folks in the 95th percentile. And that change will have a pretty dynamic effect on the costs. And one of the things that I think is difficult in implementing the work of the Quality Education Commission and the state school funding formula is that collective bargaining agreements are found in each of those 197 school districts and 19 ESDs, and that all happens at the local level. And sometimes districts, and I come from management, so just bear with me. I know I've got some teachers in the room. Some districts give away the farm, and others are very parsimonious with their compensation. And so some of that would go away, and that's probably not a bad thing in a statewide salary schedule. I just think when legislators get a taste of how much that will probably cost because of that upward leveling that I referred to, I think it'll be a pretty tough thing to bite off. But yeah, who knows?
We're coming towards the end. So the big question in the room is, how do we get the QEM fully funded? What can the commission do? What can parents, community do?
Well,
what are the magic words to get legislators to listen to the QEM?
Well, I'll give you my magic words. Relationships matter. And I'm a big fan of meeting and getting to know your local legislators, and getting to know them before you're going to ask them for the money. That you're going to invest in a long-term relationship. One of the things that I've learned is establish that relationship first. Be a resource to your legislature. Everybody's an expert in something, right? It turns out I'm pretty good at describing. If you want to talk school funding formula someday, we can do a whole nother night on that. I'm pretty good at explaining the school funding formula, as arcane and Byzantine as it can seem at times. I do a pretty good job of explaining it to folks. And so a lot of new legislators were referred to me, and I just sat down with the yellow pad and talk them through and get them up to speed on that. I wasn't asking them for more money yet, but I was a resource for them to reach out to, and I'd established that relationship before I came knocking on their door to advocate. And we already talked about what I would suggest advocating for, and that's at least trying to get to the recommendation of the Quality Education Commission, and doing that in a very thoughtful and respectful and information-filled conversation. There's nothing worse than a delightfully fact-free conversation, and we have a lot of those. We're really, really good at problem describing, and we're not very good sometimes at problem solving. So I don't know, that I probably over answered that, but that'd be my recommendation.
That's good. Have you found certain messages or certain ways of explaining that were resonated more with legislators than others?
I think it depends on the legislature. And again, you've got to meet them where they're at. Some of them have put priorities in other parts of the budget. Um, and trying to, for instance, you referred to it. What is the cost of our failure? Well, we know that we have a higher number of our population go to prisons if they're not successful in high school. Particularly if they're dropouts, numbers are scary. Well, K-12 funding is a heck of a lot cheaper than a prison bed. So somebody who's big on public safety, I might try that angle, right? Somebody who I know that might be passionate about CTE, I'll take that angle. I'll adapt to anything if I think I can move the needle on a legislature's support for funding. And yeah, it is a big ask. And even at the deficit now, 12%. But if you told me in 2 biennia you were going to meet the quality education goal, I'd sign off on that. I might vote for you again. But I'd want that commitment to be, built on that relationship that I described. I just saw something pop in the chat about marching on Salem. I don't know. I'm not much of a marcher. I probably was back in the 70s when I was obnoxious, long-haired, bearded kid in college. But I found those individual relationships to be more successful. Oh, and that reminds me, I am big on advocacy days, but I'm even bigger on showing up at the Capitol, making an appointment with your legislator when it's not Oregon PT Advocacy Day, or it's not, pick your cause, because they'll be flooded with input on that topic on that day, and they are human too, and they'll get filled up, and they'll nod politely, but they'll be done listening. So spread that advocacy out, and make it a personal relationship.
Thank you so much. There's quite a conversation in the chat going on that I don't want to stop, but we are kind of wrapping up with our official time. So I want to kind of stop here and come back to that survey that was mentioned in the beginning.
Thank you.
And I'll share my screen. And I know, Otto, you already had the link.
I
There it is.
I put it in the message I sent you.
Yeah, if you could post it to everybody, then I don't have
Okay.
to go
Yep,
back.
you got it.
That would be super helpful. John, you want to talk about what the survey is intended to do, what you're looking for?
Well, we just, our best practices section of the commission had not been particularly updated recently. So we're trying to tie it in with a lot of the really good work that's going on at ODE and implementing the School Success Act. And we want your feedback. And in the survey, you'll identify your role and give us some thoughts, because we really do want to have stakeholder input.
Thank you. And we'll share the link. I did send it out to everybody who's on to the 5,000 people on our Oregon PTA mailing list.
Right.
And I'll also send it again, share it again with the group that has registered for this event.
And one little footnote, I think right now it says the survey closes on August 30th. It is going to be extended to May 3rd. I think I believe that's a Friday, May 3rd.
Okay.
The survey will be open until May 3rd.
So start working on it now. I also want to obviously use this opportunity to promote our next few episodes. In May, on May 22nd, we'll have Morgan Allen from the Coalition of School Administrators. John, you're, I assume, very familiar with that organization.
I am.
And Jackie Olson from the School Business Officials Association. And they're going to talk with us about the CSL that was very briefly mentioned. And the question of, we had record investments in our schools. Why are we still seeing cuts? And why the talk about, it obviously everything gets more expensive every year. So do schools. How do you calculate that a little bit? And then also share their perspective from the administrator and the business official side on school budgets.
Hey, Robin, your
Yes.
formatting's weird, at least on my screen. It's like chopping off what you're showing us.
Hmm.
And then CSL, for those who are new to the process, current service level. We use a lot of acronyms in these conversations.
Yes, sorry.
And I will tell you that Morgan and Jackie are two of the very best. They're both good friends of mine. So I want you to ask them really hard questions.
Some Fred.
And I'll take input on that if you have. If he
No,
has
they're
questions I
really
should
good.
ask him, let me know.
They're really good folks. So
We moved some
better.
things around, so we still have an opening in June where we're looking for a good guest, maybe a second legislator. And then after the summer break, we'll go to the school board to talk to the school employees, the teachers, and so forth, and really hear their perspective. And then we're planning in November, that date has changed, November 15th, to have like a virtual conference to talk about advocacy and how can we take all the insights that we gain from our guests to be effective advocates for education in 2025. I also have a couple of opportunities for you to connect and advocate right now. Tomorrow is the Oregon PTA convention this weekend in Hillsborough. We have, for the metro area, the Families for Equity in Schools kickoff on the 30th. And we as Oregon PTA have a legislative committee of committed advocates where we're trying to steer the legislative and advocacy work of Oregon PTA and try to put on events like this and come up with good questions for our guests. So if you're interested in joining that one, please let me know. There's another form. You can fill that out. Everyone a meeting. Yes, and obviously voting is coming up on May 21st. That is always great. Last note I want to make, and I'm going, well, maybe feels like a tangent here, but Oregon PTA and National PTA have a arts contest program for all children. And I'm actually also the chair of that. And I really love the theme this year, which is accepting imperfection. So I wanted to promote that. If you're thinking about engaging with the kids in your school, I want to hear their opinion. Art is a great way for them to express it. And accepting imperfection is just such a great and important topic in terms of social, emotional health, and just being a welcoming and inclusive environment for everyone. Thank you so much. That concludes our meeting. John, thank you so much for this conversation. I'm going to stop the recording now.